I think we should be a little cautious here. I mean, calling something a state is absolutely nothing. I mean, South Africa, for example, in the worst days, wanted the world to recognize the states that it had set up, like Transkei. I mean, they were states, you know, had their own presidents and armies and everything else. And the Bantustans, the homeland. And South Africa was trying to get the world to recognize them. No one would do it properly. The first, if you really want to know the truth, the first government in Israel that was willing to officially consider a Palestinian state was the Netanyahu government, the most reactionary of all. Its Minister of Information, Dore Gold, who I think is an American, judging by his accent, he had an interview with someone, and he said, look, if they want a state, we'll allow them to call it a state. And then he said they can call it chopped chicken if they like, you know. Call it whatever they want. You want to call it a state, okay, as long as we control it and it's a Bantustan, they can call it a state. The Bush proposals were not taken seriously by anyone, even the articles that reported them. You didn't have to wait for leaks. If you read, the way to read the newspapers, say the New York Times, always is begin from the end of the column. You know, begin from the end of the column on the continuation page. There you may learn something. The first couple of paragraphs, you get what's given to the editorial writers and the propagandists and so on. Then, if it's an honest journalist, toward the end of the column, they'll say something, usually on the continuation page. And that was true in this case. A lot of hullabaloo about, gee, Powell and Bush are talking about a Palestinian state. You go into the continuation page, they start quoting high officials and this and that, and they say, well, look, we're not going to go as far as Clinton did, certainly. And where Clinton went is nowhere. You know, here it was called magnanimous and wonderful, but as soon as you look at a map, you knew that isn't true. I suppose that's one of the reasons that maps were never published. Try to find one of the proposals. And in the region, everybody knows, including the Israeli press. But they said they're not even going to go that far. Well, you know, maybe they'll change. Who knows? They don't have to take polls to find that out. But the change is not so simple. I mean, every year it gets harder. You know, it was hard 10 years ago. It's much harder 5 years ago. It was harder, still harder a year ago. It's still harder now. And the reason is that the settlement and integration of the occupied territories and the takeover of their resources continues. Who's paying for it? You and me. In one or another way, we're indirectly paying for it. There's, you know, the U.S., every time Israel assassinates someone, there's a mild tap on the wrist. Dozens of assassinations so far. How are they doing it? I mean, when they assassinate somebody by helicopters, as they do regularly, where are they getting the helicopters? They don't produce helicopters. That's one of their advanced military system, but they don't produce helicopters. We give them the helicopters, knowing what they're going to do with it. I mean, as soon as the U.S. helicopters began to attack civilian compounds last October 1st and 2nd, there was no fire. You know, it was just attacking civilian targets, killing dozens of people. Instantly, Clinton arranged for the biggest shipment of helicopters in a decade to Israel, October 3rd. Couldn't get any press in the United States to report it. I mean, not that there weren't efforts. There were. I was involved in them and others. They wouldn't report it. But it happened. You know, read it in the Israeli press if you want, or the international military press. Yeah, it happened. The Bush administration sent new attack helicopters, more advanced ones, the ones that are being used to murder people, like the ones who killed Abu Ali Mustafa, the most important political leader killed, assassinated. And that was everybody knew at that time there's going to be revenge, and yesterday there was. They killed an Israeli right-wing parliamentarian in revenge. But who sent the helicopter to kill the political leader in the first place? Well, we did. So, yeah, as long as that goes on, the cycle of violence will go on. The U.S. knows exactly how to maybe not stop it, but certainly mitigate it and lessen it. In all sorts of ways, but they're not under internal pressure to do it, and for their own reasons they don't want to. Well, if I was Bush, I'd, resign before I get tried by a criminal court. But if I gave that impression, I wasn't being clear. I don't think these are vacuous concepts, and I don't think they're just subjective. I think they're very clear, reasonably clear concepts. Not clear like quantum physics, but reasonably clear. For example, when the World Court reached its decision condemning the United States for international terrorism, it had good grounds and a solid argument, runs through hundreds of pages if you read it. The U.S. knew that it was a solid argument. That's why the U.S. refused to accept the jurisdiction of the court. And yes, that was pretty clear. It wasn't vacuous. Same with terrorism. If I didn't make it clear, let me say it now. I think the definition given in the U.S. Code and U.S. Army manuals is the right definition. I've always accepted it. The definition that I quoted, I think, is exactly the right definition. Okay, it doesn't answer every imaginable question. You can have a philosophy seminar where you can make up cases where it doesn't deal with. But in the real world, it covers almost everything. There's nothing subjective about it. The point is that it cannot be accepted because of its consequences. Its consequences tell us that we're doing terrible things, and therefore we don't accept it. I mean, the Nazis weren't carrying out counter-terror. They were carrying out terror. I mean, they called it counter-terror, and the U.S. military agreed with them, but for their own reasons. We don't have to accept that. It's not a vacuous, subjective concept. That's true of, if you're a lawyer, so you know better than I do. I mean, the legal system does not apply trivially to every situation that comes up. That's why judges have to think. But nevertheless, it's a framework. Sometimes you think it's a wrong framework, so you change the laws. But it's a framework, and the same is true of international law, and the same is true of terrorism, and the same is true of peace. If I can restate your question, let's put it this, see if I get it wrong. Suppose you're the president of the leading terrorist state in the world, and the World Court condemns you for terrorism and orders you to stop, and the Security Council tries to pass a resolution calling on you to observe international law, and you veto it. Then what do you do as president of the United States? Well, you don't try to change the World Court. You don't try to change the UN. You stop your terrorism. Okay? Well, you figure out what you think is I'm not telling you. Look, I think it's the wrong thing to do the plans that they are now announcing is their plans. Their assumptions are that what they're doing may very well kill a couple of million innocent people in Afghanistan. Okay, I happen to think that's wrong. If somebody else thinks it's right, okay. I think it's wrong, terribly wrong, in fact monstrous, and I think we ought to do something about it.